Final wrap-up version as we get ready to start the voting for the transit plan. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes.
I was on the MTA. Just on the MTA.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Office of Community, Neighborhood, and Government Relations here at Vanderbilt and the Center for Transportation and Operational Resilience, also in the School of Civil Engineering here at Vanderbilt, really delighted to welcome you all to the fourth and final of our forums about one of the most important issues that faces our city and region, and that's the vote in a couple of weeks with respect to the transit plan. We have tried to organize a group of informative forums and panels that can help everyone make an informed decision about the future of our community, and I think you will find that this one will accomplish that as well. As far as format is concerned, I'm Craig Phillip, and I'm lead the Vector Transportation Center here, and I'm going to moderate our panel this morning. I'll introduce our 5 panelists here in just a moment. We'll invite each of them to make a 5 to 7 minute set of comments about their views and perspectives on the transit plan, mobility, and so forth in the Middle Tennessee area. And then we will open it up for questions. I think we're going to invite people to write their questions down if you can, and we'll try to curate those a little bit so that we can have as coherent and seamless a quick Q&A process as possible, and we'll be ending somewhere around 1 o'clock or so. So let me introduce our panel as they're seated. First to my left is Jeff Yarbro, who is a state senator from District 21. He was elected to the state senate in 2014. He serves on a variety of committees, including transportation, and he has been a forceful advocate for a variety of issues, including affordable housing, healthcare access, criminal justice reform. Jeff also served on the Metropolitan Transit Authority Board of Directors, and he is also an attorney with Bass, Berry & Sims. Steve Bland is the Chief Executive Officer of the Metropolitan Transit Authority and the Regional Transportation Authority here in Middle Tennessee. He arrived in Nashville in 2014 to take on that role. He's a lifetime transit manager. He has had CEO roles at transit agencies in York, Pennsylvania, Albany, New York, and before coming to Nashville and Pittsburgh. He's been very active leading the transit associations that represent all the transit authorities around the country. Katherine Mcdonald is an assistant professor of neurology at Vanderbilt's Medical Center. She also arrived in Nashville in 2014, where she began a fellowship here at the Medical Center, and following the fellowship, she joined the faculty as an assistant professor of neurology. She's a transportation junkie, both riding and both a rider of bikes and user of transit, and she's been particularly interested in what's called active transportation, i.e. getting us all out of our cars and using bikes and walking as a way to improve our health. And she serves on several of the committees, including one here at Vanderbilt called Bike 2 VU, and one here locally called Walk Bike Nashville. Bill Purcell is former mayor of Nashville. He co-chaired the Transit and Affordability Taskforce that we talked about at the last forum. He was mayor of our city from 1999 to 2007, and we've been fortunate in our region and here at Vanderbilt that he has chosen to settle in here on the faculty. He is also a practicing attorney in town. One thing I didn't know about him is that he chairs a roundtable for the National Academy of Sciences on obesity solutions in the United States. And finally, Gail Williams is the Associate Director of the Vanderbilt University Department of Community, Neighborhood, and Government Relations, and honestly, we have Gail to thank for organizing and conducting these forums here over the last 4 months. In 2014, I guess that's a common year, she moved over in addition to her leadership capacities at the university. She became a lecturer in the Peabody School, and she is the current chair of the Metropolitan Transit Authority's Board of Directors. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to share their perspectives, and then we will move on to a Q&A, which will consume the balance of our time together. Jeff, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Craig, and thanks everyone for being here today. I think this is an exciting time and a very important decision. And over the last 4 years in the state legislature, I've been fortunate enough to serve in the Transportation Committee, which is where just last year we authorized Nashville to have this referendum. Before this time, the city did not have the ability to create a dedicated revenue source. And if you've met my friends in the legislature, there's the likelihood of there being a state allocation for dedicated transit revenue is probably a fair bit of time in coming. So we're in a unique moment of opportunity, and for me this is the type of opportunity that Nashville usually excels at. I think this is a city that takes the future eyes wide open, that responds to challenges. I think there are certainly some people out there who think if they can vote against this, they will stop the growth in the city. And that is not how this works. Growth is occurring, growth will continue to occur, and the question is whether we handle it smartly or not. And for my money, the biggest deficiency in the current plan is it's about 10 years too late. The traffic gets harder, the cost goes up each moment that the city waits. Just doing right away for what it takes to do this today, significantly more than what it would have been a decade ago, and still significantly less than what it's going to be a decade from now. We are dealing with a demographic challenge that I think is interesting and good for a city. People are living longer. We like that. That's a great thing. But as people are living longer into retirement, that doesn't mean that they're always going to be driving as much. But when parents, grandparents stop driving, like, they should not lose their mobility. They should not lose their ability to travel around the city. We also are dealing with the fact that more and more young people that are moving to cities like Nashville don't want to be bound by a car. And so on both the younger end and the higher end, we have a demographic challenge that our city does not address right now. And we're one of cities our size and trajectory, we're one of the only cities that doesn't. If you think about the largest city in America without mass transit is Detroit. Which has a really different set of problems than Nashville does. And our problems are really about mobility and affordability. And I think that those are good problems to have. They're the signs of economic success, but they are still very significant problems. They're problems that make it harder to live in the neighborhoods that you have lived in, and that make it harder to keep your job in the same place. And I think that if we're going to be serious about doing something with affordability and housing, I think that I think it's foolhardy to think that we can do that without a significant change in the way that our transportation system works. I think without density that allows people to be able to live without cars, that allows people to live frankly increase some vertical growth in corridors, you're going to continue to see more sprawled out congestion and gentrification across the city in a way that's undirected and unintentional, frankly. And after many months with lots of stakeholders, I think we've got a real plan here that grows in the way that Nashville wants to, does so in a way that is responsible, has been vetted. I think there's lots of, I think anytime you do something this complex and make an investment this large, people should have questions and concerns, because that's the reality. You should have those questions and concerns on anything that's worth doing. But I don't think that we can have our head in the sands and pretend that growth's going to stop or that we're not going to need to address traffic. And I don't think that we can have our head in the clouds and think that technologies that don't exist today, aren't legal today, are going to somehow magically solve our problems 10 or 15 years in the future. I think we have to continue our, the ethos of this city, which is to be eyes wide open on this issue and make a smart, responsible decision.
Well said. Craig mentioned I came in 2014, and I see Freddie O'Connell and Marion Ott in the audience as well. So 80% of the people who hired me are here. And if you have a problem with anything I say today, I suggest you take it up with them. First of all, with respect to the plan, I think it's important. I'm not going to, I was contemplating reading all 56 pages, but this is a pretty literate crowd, so I'll resist doing that. I do want to go into a bit of history on how it sort of emerged, though. Starting with Nashville Next, which was Nashville's redevelopment of its comprehensive plan that engaged thousands of Nashvillians. The goal, recognizing that we are growing. Frankly, nobody wants to stop it. Not sure we could if we wanted to. But it's how do we grow? How do we retain the quality of life that we're looking for? How do we retain our open spaces in outlying parts of the county? How do we keep our heritage neighborhoods in the condition that they're in? So after extensive technical work and the input of thousands of Nashvillians, that goal was to kind of build on the density in our cores, like our downtown core, and along many of our corridors. And there was a recognition even in Nashville Next that we couldn't do that without a robust mass transit system. Metro Transit Authority and the Regional Transportation Authority picked up the gauntlet with the completion of Nashville Next with the In Motion Strategic Transit Plan. And coming out of that plan, again, we engaged about 20,000 Middle Tennesseans, because it was make no mistake, it was a regional plan encompassing 10 counties, Davidson County and the 9 essentially ring counties, including Montgomery County and Clarksville, all the way down into Murray County and Columbia. Two of the overriding goals that came out of the first phase of that plan before we started looking at things like light rail or bus rapid transit were, number one, we wanted to provide Middle Tennesseans the option to have faster, more reliable travel options in our key congested corridors. So that was one of the primary goals. And the second was to expand the range of mobility options of all types to those Nashvillians who don't have access to their own car or a single occupant auto one way or another. And unfortunately, that is a significant segment of our community, and it's about 2/3 of the MTA's current ridership base that I think sometimes gets kind of lost in this. We all know about the general growth trends, but the issue of, well, why downtown? Why a downtown-focused system? Why a hub-and-spoke system? The way we are laid out geographically, look at our rivers, our Indian trails, certainly our interstate highway system. Nashville is second only to Indianapolis in the number of interstate highways that intersect in the downtown core. Nashville is a downtown hub-and-spoke dominant system, and whether you're talking to the mayor of Nashville or the mayor of Columbia or the mayor of Spring Hill, they recognize that a healthy downtown core is absolutely key to the success of their areas. So let's talk about downtown. As part of this, leading into it, working with Public Works, we developed some work on the downtown mobility study. Just with projects in the pipeline, so these are things that are under construction, in permitting, in preliminary planning. Not all will hit the ground, but some will pop up that we don't know about yet. Here's what we could expect to see in the next few years just in downtown Nashville. 12,935 additional residential units, 8.2 million square feet of office space, 8,454 hotel rooms, 464,000 square feet of new restaurants, 1.3 million square feet of retail, 270,000 square feet of additional entertainment space. All of this, when you churn it through the traffic engineering models that are near and dear to Craig's heart, calls for about a 50% increase in the volume of traffic entering and leaving our downtown core. So if you think CMA week is bad, imagine it every day of the year. The issue is, how do we get in and out of town most efficiently? And that's why the high capacity corridors became kind of the backbone of the system. So Jeff talked extensively, and our thanks to Jeff and many of his colleagues for passing the IMPROVE Act, in addition to giving the capability for counties like Davidson County to do local option funding for mass transit, extensive amount of funds through the gas tax for TDOT to kind of catch up on the backlog. So can't we just widen or double deck, I heard recently, some of our interstate corridors? Programs that are projects that TDOT has programmed that would address congestion through widening in the IMPROVE Act are essentially a widening of I-440 from I-40 to I-24, that's in the program. Widening of Franklin Road from Concord Road to Moore's Lane down in Williamson County. A widening of Nolensville Road from Burkett Road to Old Hickory, and a widening of Clarksville Pike from Ashland City Highway to Briley Parkway. So all of those widenings will improve flow for at least a period of time until latent demand catches up, forcing more traffic volume into that downtown core. So once you get inside the inner loop, when you add the new demands of downtown and the additional volume that those outer arterials will be able to carry, the alternative, if we don't do mass transit, is force more traffic onto your neighborhood streets or simply make the city impenetrable. So that was one of the goals. The second goal, when we look at what I'll refer to as the folks who don't have the other options, we currently rank 93rd out of the top 100 cities with respect to worker access to public transportation. And that's contributing to an ever-widening gap in our income levels among the haves and have-nots in our community. So a large part of the plan is focused on, while attention I think has rightfully been placed on things like light rail and tunnel and what have you, pour through the 56 pages and find things like connected options, first mile, last mile service, open payment systems that allow folks who maybe don't have, who are unbanked or don't have access to a smartphone, the ability to access current technologies such as our new transportation networking companies, things like bike share. The fact that we would essentially be improving and extending sidewalks and pedestrian connections, hundreds of miles of new sidewalk, significantly improved safety in our key congested corridors in conjunction with high-capacity transit. It's all about expanding the capabilities and the options of Middle Tennesseans to move around. So that's kind of a summary of where we saw the plan come from, some of the primary goals that we saw coming out of it, and really where we are today. And I, for one, doing now about 8 or 9 of these a week, to say I cannot wait till May 1st. So, thank you.
Hi, so I'm Katherine Mcdonald. I'm one of the neurologists here at Vanderbilt. I've also been here for about 4 years, since about 2014. I'm really happy and honored to be at this forum. I'm definitely not a transit expert, but I wanted to share a little bit about my commuting story and why I think transit in Nashville is so important. I never really thought I would turn into an active transportation advocate. It wasn't really part of the plan, but it's something that I've become really passionate about over the last several years. I grew up in Memphis, which, like Nashville, has always been a very car-centric city. I never really had much experience with public transportation until I moved to Chicago for medical school. I didn't have a car there, so I walked, I took the bus, I took the train, everywhere I went. And it was a really novel and liberating idea to be able to get somewhere without having to drive. I started biking to work during my residency in Boston because it was the fastest, cheapest, and most reliable way to get there. It just kind of made sense. I didn't really think much about it at the time. Over time, after I started doing this, I kind of realized all the other benefits of an active commute. I started looking forward to my commute. I realized it was an amazing stress reliever and a mental health break, which is pretty hard to come by during residency. It was also a built-in workout twice a day, which was pretty amazing because I would never have exercised otherwise. And it was really fun, too. I would come to work energized and excited, and my co-residents kept asking me why I was so happy every day. So I really realized that biking to work got me through residency, which I think is a pretty impressive feat in itself. When I moved to Nashville, I drove to Vanderbilt for the first year I was here. It was kind of what you did here. The traffic made me crazy. I would come home stressed out. I hated it. So I finally gave up my parking pass and I started biking again. It didn't take me long to realize it was actually even faster than driving, especially when you factor in the time that it takes to drive to the parking garage halfway across campus, drive all the way up to the top, and then walk back across campus to the office. On my bike, I can just park right outside the door and walk in. The other thing people don't often realize about driving, that it's really unpredictable and unreliable. It can take anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic, Predators games, football games, music events. You just never know what you're going to get. On my bike, it's 25 minutes door to door every time. Over the last year as well, I've started combining biking and riding the bus. Biking and transit are really the perfect combination because you get the benefits of both. You get the flexibility, door-to-door accessibility, and built-in exercise of riding a bike, plus you get the extra speed and distance with transit. All of our buses have bike racks now, which I really appreciate. They might look a little bit intimidating at first, but they're actually really easy to use. I'm happy to show anybody if they want to. I also walk to the bus a lot, and I find that it connects me so much more with my neighborhood than when I drive. I like taking the bus because it's your time. You can relax, you can read, you can check emails, you can make new friends. You get a sense that you're part of a community when you walk, bike, or ride the bus that you never really get when you drive. And if you work for Vanderbilt, it's free to take the bus, which I think is a really kind of underappreciated and underutilized benefit of working here. Active commuting also has direct health benefits. A study that came out last year in the British Medical Journal showed that people who bike to work had a 41% lower risk of death from all causes, a 46% lower risk of heart disease, and a 45% lower risk of cancer. Even people who biked part of the way to work had a 24% lower risk of death. And you also don't have to bike to get these results. Walking to work was associated with a 27% lower risk of heart disease and a 36% lower risk of death from heart problems. The American Heart Association recommends at least 150 minutes of exercise per week. That's about 30 minutes 5 days a week. And it's really hard to get that when you're sitting in a car all day. Walking or biking to work or to transit is a really great way to start. There was actually a story on NPR this morning about another study that showed that transit users walk an average of 3/4 of a mile a day more than people who drive, and had much lower rates of obesity as well. I've also seen firsthand where we need improvements in our system, and why it's so important to all Nashvillians for this transit plan to pass. Our bus system desperately needs more frequency, more flexibility, more crosstown routes, and more funding. We need to make sure our bus stops are safe to walk and bike to, and are accessible to people of all ages and abilities. We need sidewalks and bike lanes and crosswalks, and reduced fares for seniors and low-income residents. We need expanded access ride services, so my patients can get to the grocery store and to their appointments even when they can't drive anymore. We need BRT lines to get buses out of traffic, and we need light rail to move more people faster. It shouldn't be a controversial idea that people should have choices in how they get around. I can honestly say that I love my commute, and that's not something that you hear from most people in Nashville, but it can be. I'm going to vote right after work today. I hope everybody else will join me as well, and we can vote for transit.
Well, Katherine has caused me to want to stand up. I felt my heart and entire body slowing down as she gave those statistics. I am delighted to be part of this panel. I want to note for the record that one half of the panel lives in East Nashville within 3 blocks of each other. There's never been a panel that was 50% East Nashville at Vanderbilt, and I thank Gail and everyone who was involved. And then to have our state senator here as well is a special delight. If you needed, however, any further encouragement, let me say that this particular group, I think, is just the right group of people. I look out and it's undergraduates and graduates and faculty and neighbors and all kinds of folks gathered here. And if you want a sense of how important this issue is, in the back corner, back there where either those most strongly converted or the greatest sinners usually sit, are Freddie O'Connell, a leading member of the City Council, identified earlier, represents the downtown area, and it lives in the Germantown-Salemtown area, sitting next to Ralph Schultz. And Ralph is the president and CEO of the Nashville Chamber of Commerce, a group that saw this issue first and frankly has been there throughout his tenure and beyond. Let me start back just a little bit further. It's 1999. A number of things happened at that same time. First, the smartest freshman class in Vanderbilt history was either born or had just been born in 1999. There was a new mayor elected that year as well. Statistics were generated by the chamber and others at that very time that said 2 things very quickly, and I convey them to you because they're important to remember. 1, we had a shortage of affordable housing in the city of Nashville of 35,000 units. If we didn't do something to move forward to have more affordable housing, then the quality of life in the community would be compromised. And last, when we reviewed the MTA and the condition of our transit system, we found, and this is a very hard and real statistic, 1/2 of all of the buses in the city of Nashville were eligible for antique license plates in the year 1999. That's where we were. Those are the things that we hadn't paid attention to. At the same time, we were paying distinct attention to people in another way. We had decided, earliest city to my knowledge, maybe the only city to decide in so aggressive a way, that the problem with cities was people. If we could get the people out of the cities, then the cities would thrive. This was a bad idea. It was a wrong idea, but it was our idea, and we were more successful than any city in America. At the time, 1999, there were, in a city of 680,000 people, 900 people living downtown. In a city with the same population as Boston, then and now, same population as Boston, Massachusetts, imagine. Then 640, now 680,000 people, only 900 people downtown. That's how we'd come to abandon those other things that are so critical to cities. So we got to work. We replaced those buses. We changed the way in which we organized our transit system. We began to build and rehabilitate affordable housing. And you who were here, the freshman class wasn't fully cognizant yet, but you who were here began to see these important issues move forward. Now a recession came, a terrible recession came. Priorities changed in the city and other places. And now we look up and find ourselves not back where we started, but in a very difficult crossroads in our history, which is we are now 31,000 units short on affordable housing in the city of Nashville. And those are critical units for those who are graduating from here, for those who have kids and grandkids that you'd like to live here, for those who would like their policeman or police officer or their firefighter or their librarian, or choose your public servant that you'd like to live in your city. The places for them to live do not exist. That's what that shortage means for us at this time. At the core of all of this is assuring the quality of life that we have now and making sure it's there for those who will follow us to this place, whether they're members of our family or people that we don't know. In order for this city to keep moving forward, we've got to have those things in place. And transit's an essential part of that. The secret of Nashville's success during its first 100 years was certainly the fact that we were focused on transportation, whether it was the rivers or the railroads. We were the earliest city, among the earliest cities in the Southeast to have, guess what, trolleys, electric vehicles on our streets. We saw the need for transportation, and it advanced the cause of the city overall. Now, we looked away at different points. And to be honest with you, those were points in time when the future of the city was uncertain. Now is a moment when everyone in the city, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or the City Council or this university, our students, our graduates, are focused on what do we need and when do we need it. We need this transit referendum to provide not only for the buses and the transit opportunities that have been described, but to honestly give us a chance to move forward in the way in which we plan our corridors, plan our construction, think about small business, and not only advancing affordable housing, but preserving what we have here. Without these resources, that is not possible. Without these resources, then today is how things stand. There is no other place. There are those who think somehow this will happen magically. It doesn't. It never did before. It won't again. It only happens when you have the resources and the political will and the commitment and people coming together to move that forward. And that's where we are right now. May the 1st we get a chance to vote. And I'm going to vote to make sure that we have that future that, frankly, we foresaw for so long and we now understand we can have again.
Good afternoon. Now, you'd have thought that I was a little smarter than to put Mayor Purcell's name next to mine to come after you. It was amazing, right? I could almost go straight down the line and say ditto, 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 right? Because I think all of the conversations have been great and right to the point. So maybe if I can come from just another perspective. First of all, I want to give a huge shout out to Mary and I. You know, Mary and I sort of trained me to be a board member at MTA. So I'm just grateful that you're here and that you have done so much for transit in Nashville. And you should always be applauded for the work that you have done. And Freddie, councilman in the back. I remember Freddie was young, sort of right back to Nashville and sat next to us and certainly under Marion and myself next to you, and look at you now. So we take credit for a lot of that, but it's great to have you. And Jeff was on the board at that time as well. And so it was sort of, the planning of this sort of started, and so as I sort of look at all of us here, we started talking about what does the planning process look. And that had to be in excess of 4 or 5 years, and then Steve came aboard, and now Steve is very much a part of it. So it's been quite a journey. And to talk a little bit about why I like transit so much and why I care so much about transit is that I'm a child of transit. Speaking of Detroit, my dad was a bus driver in Detroit for 40 years. And my dad loved being a bus driver. And my dad cared about his passengers. And my dad was able to provide for our family, 5 of us, a really good, healthy life. We rode the bus every day. Remind you, we're in Detroit, and it was no fear, it was no trepidation. We got to places. I even went to a school about 25 miles outside of Detroit. He taught me how to take both the Detroit bus as well as a regional bus to be able to get to where I had to get. And mind you, I started taking the bus in 6th grade by myself, and even doing this regional kind of transportation. So transportation provided for us a different kind of life and a different opportunity, because if transit wasn't available, I wouldn't have had those opportunities. And if drivers, committed, courageous drivers like my dad were not part of transit system, then again, people wouldn't have the opportunities to access good health, access jobs, and access opportunity. So transit matters. Transit matters in a myriad of ways. And so as we look at Nashville, and we've all talked about how much Nashville changes, how do people get to and from where they get to? How do kids get to choices in school? How does all of that work if we don't have good transit? And if we don't have an opportunity to fund transit in meaningful ways and through dedicated sources, because we talked about dedicated sources of funding, I don't know how many times. You know, our finance committees was always, well, you know, how many more ways can we access dollars? What else can we do? And Metro Council members and all of our mayors have just been tremendous in supporting transit, but there comes a point that there's other things in Metro Nashville that have to be supported financially as well. And speaking of mayors, Mayor Purcell, you appointed me to the MTA board. And I remember calling my mom and dad and saying, you know what, I'm in the city and it's great. And this mayor just called me and appointed me to MTA. And my dad was, what? He was happier than I was. So thank you for making him so happy and proud. And so I serve with that pride. And I'm grateful to be able to do this and move transit in Nashville in meaningful ways. I think as a board member, we must always think about the totality of Nashville. We must think about it being inclusive, and we must think about what is the best policy that is going to further transit in Nashville. What's going to be the safest transit? What's going to be the most reliable transit? And what's the kind of transit that people are going to feel comfortable and safe? You talked about having safe bus stops, having access to be able to put your bike on. So what is that? I remember we first had the conversations about putting bike racks on the bus. We didn't have bike racks at first. And now we have these bike racks. And it was a conversation about making certain people were safe as they were able to put the bike on the bike rack in the front of the bus. And there was a lot of conversation, but that change came about and it happened. And people use it all of the time and expect to use it. So it's about building expectation. It's about growing excellence and continuing excellence. And most importantly, it's about getting Nashvillians to and from places safely and to be able to access the city in the ways that Nashvillians deserve to be a part of. I voted yesterday, and there weren't long lines. Just saying. It was easy. I went over to the Bell Mead, is it the police department or the administrative officer? It wasn't crowded. So if you don't have much to do after you leave here, you could walk up to West End, and those who here work at Vanderbilt, you could swipe your card, and you could ride right up there and get off the bus and then turn around and come back. But if this transit plan passes, you'll have an opportunity to do that a little bit faster next time you vote. So in any event, I thank you for the opportunity, and I would be remiss because I have been an active participant in all four of these if I didn't thank the staff of Community, Neighborhood, and Government Relations. Chandra Allison has ordered all of your lunches for all of you who have been here and has sort of helped to facilitate all this. So I just want to say thank you to Chandra, and I see Christine Bradley and Lynn McDonald in the back. So I want to thank them for supporting the program, and also Norma Clifford, who runs our OSHA Lifelong Learning Program, and being here and being supportive. So thank you all very much. And Craig, you're a rock star.
Thank you, Gail, and reserve that comment until I make my closing remarks. So we'll see if you agree with me. I'm going to take my turn at the podium as we wrap up this session in 45 minutes or so. I think there's people going around the room. If you've got any questions, please scribble them out, and we'll try to get those organized for our panel. I've got a couple to get us started. And what I've tried to do is to just pick off topics that I know are in the conversation, just from reading the commentaries that are being provided in our day-to-day media. And so the first question I want to ask is kind of a question about equity, and I think Mayor Purcell and Jeff spoke about this a little bit, but let me ask it a little more specifically. And how does this plan address the needs of the least among us in our community? Specifically, there's as Jeff and Bill both talked about, the issues of gentrification are front and center as being major problems. And Bill, your comment about the number of affordable housing units we needed in 1999 is a good reminder that it's not a new phenomenon, but there's certainly a more than anecdotal information to suggest that people are being displaced from one core neighborhood and often are finding themselves in more peripheral neighborhoods, and Antioch and Madison come to mind as specifics, but there are other places as well. So I wonder if you could speak to how you view the plan addressing this reality of gentrification, which is going to be with us irrespective of this plan.
Well, and I appreciate the way you asked the question, because you really were focused on the needs of a whole lot of people. So this is the report that we issued. It's available online. It's the Transit and Affordability Taskforce report. Brenda Wynn, our county clerk, and I co-chaired, and there was a broad cross-section of Nashvillians who were represented on that task force. And we were very, very focused on two aspects of this. One, although we are, again, focused as a city on issues of affordability, both preserving the affordable housing we have and also building more. Frankly, under current funding mechanisms and current policies, there is little chance that we would fill those gaps in our lifetimes, if ever. That's the first part. Secondly, we also understood, as Gail pointed out, and others here did too, that a critical part to providing not just work opportunities but general ability to live within the city was providing transportation options to people. And I've heard reference to Lyft and Uber, and I use Lyft as frequently as anyone that you know. But if you are earning a minimum or just above minimum wage in this city, the notion that you can afford to spend $15 to $20 to get to your workplace and $15 to $20 to get back from your workplace and knock out the first 2 hours of your workday and the second 2 hours, that money's gone. Those are not going to fill the gaps for people who need to get to work, whether it's at Vanderbilt or the far corners of this city. So we have to provide the ability for people to move about their city, and we have to provide the ability for people to live within their city. And that's not just for them. That's a clear, I think, moral and ethical obligation. I believe that. My minister, my former minister, Lee Parkinson, is sitting here. And you don't know what a comfort it is, but also how scary it is to have your minister sitting there. But so I acknowledge to you, Lee, that I listened a lot. Most Sundays, and I'm absolutely convinced that we have a moral, ethical, whatever your religious faith, whatever your beliefs may be, that's an obligation that we have as a people, but we have an economic obligation. That's why Ralph Schultz and the Chamber of Commerce are here. We need to provide the ability for people to live with us, near us, and at the same time be able to move. Now, what this task force recommends is that we do begin to increase our investment. We think at least 2%. Of the total cost of this plan, at $5.4 billion, ought to be considered as a benchmark for spending. That's $100 million over the life of the plan. We believe it's conservative to estimate that could generate a multiplier of 4 overall for a total of $400 million that we believe the private and public sectors together will put into this development. We have experience in this area. We have built affordable housing in the past. Private developers take the lead and do it when we incentivize them in modest ways and, more importantly, encourage them in other ways to provide the housing that we need and they need at the same time. I don't think there's any question when you look at Denver and other cities that are leading us in this area, it's a challenge, but it's a challenge we have to meet, and we believe we can. In a reasonable way in terms of public investment, and more importantly by encouraging private investment that will provide what we need and protect what we have.
I think equity is at the heart of this plan. It should not be the case that if your car breaks down, you can't go to work. And for a lot of people, that's the reality right now. If you're a family that's trying to maintain 2 cars and maintain that on making a commute, like, your cost of vehicle ownership and maintenance rivals and oftentimes exceeds even your housing prices. The cost of operating a vehicle and owning a vehicle is absolutely part of the affordability equation that people in this city are addressing. And so if we're not providing greater transit options for people, we are standing in the way of their ability to connect to opportunities, be they education, employment, or at the very least to spend more time with their family between those things. It's also, while not part of this technical plan, it's important to note that we did pass transit-oriented development along with the Improve Act, which does provide additional mechanisms to increase the amount and availability of affordable housing along those routes. And one thing that oftentimes doesn't get noted in this is how many, I actually want to ask this question, how many people have noticed that your sales tax went down over the last year? Every time you went to the grocery store in the last few months, you've been paying a cent less in sales tax because we decreased the sales tax on groceries at the same time that we gave cities the ability to increase the sales tax for transit. And that wasn't unintentional. That was not in the original plan, but it's something that we fought for because we wanted the tax burdens to be more equal, especially for those people who spend more and more of their resources at, like on necessities of life. And that is one of the things that was done in this plan that I think actually works towards making it equitable. And then finally, it's important to remember the ridership following this, and Steve can speak to this. We're talking about free ridership for students and the economically disadvantaged, reduced ridership costs for senior citizens, and especially at a place like Vanderbilt, which is the largest generator of rides in the region. I think we know that there are going to be a lot more people who are able to travel here more affordably.
Yeah, if I could just jump on Jeff's last point, part of the plan that probably is getting, I suppose, underappreciated is in the very short term, if passed, by the end of 2018, anyone who falls below the poverty line will qualify for free transit access. And if you don't think that's super valuable to folks, people may remember, I know Freddie does, goes through his district. This past year, under the prior Metro budget, we extended the Music City Circuit, which had been the downtown circulator, up through Germantown and then into North Nashville and up to TSU. And since that time, even when you account for the prior service that was there, we've seen a 50% increase in ridership. Now that neighborhood's growing, but it isn't quite growing that fast. And what we've actually seen is an increase in the number of trips taken by many of our current customers. So as it became more affordable, with that free fare, they were able to use the system more. And that was combined with greater frequency and the types of things that are associated with service improvements that do generate ridership.
I just want to say one of the things that's paramount to the decision making at our board level is really about equity. And I think we oftentimes challenge MTA professionals and ask them questions about whether or not something's equitable, particularly if we think about fare changes or if we think about when we talked about the transfer situation. So equity becomes really important because, again, we recognize that we are the fiduciary of all people here in Nashville. And I would also sort of give a really good shout out to Vanderbilt, because Vanderbilt has the Easy Ride program, which allows all faculty, staff, and students to ride as part of a benefit of working at Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt was the first employer to start with the Easy Ride program, and it does create accessibility and sort of stretches dollars a lot more for the riders who are here at Vanderbilt. And I would encourage other employers to do the same.
I just want to talk briefly about another vulnerable population that we don't talk about much, and that's our seniors. So I'm a cognitive neurologist, which means I see a lot of people that have dementia. Alzheimer's disease, other forms of dementia, a lot of cognitive issues that eventually will lead to the loss of the ability to drive. And that is the hardest conversation I have with my patients. You can tell someone they have Alzheimer's, you can tell someone they're going to die, and they're okay with that. You tell them you're going to take away their car, and they cannot handle it. It's a huge loss of independence, and it's because there are no other options for them. It's how they get around, and they don't know another way. And so they really need other options, even when they're able to maybe walk to a bus stop, maybe get on a bus, but it's so inaccessible, and it's not even part of their thinking that they can do that. So expanding Access Ride, making bus stops more accessible, making buses come frequently, I think is really important for them as well.
Thank you for that, for those responses. Let me move to a different element of the plan that I know concerns many. This is a long-term vision for where we're headed. It's quite specific in many dimensions. How in the world are we going to change the plan when 10 years from now things are not as we expect them to be? How will that work administratively? How will it work from the perspective of the legislature? So it kind of gets to the broad question of we're entrusting a lot. Sometimes it's been called a blank check. And so I'm interested in your perspectives from the MTA side, from the legislative side, and Bill, from the perspective of the leadership of the elected city itself, how that's all going to unfold.
Well, I guess I'll start. When we took the original Transportation Improvement Plan to Metro Council back in the early part of this year, you know, that was a question, a concern expressed by a number of council people. Do we just vote for this and then we don't have any other says to it? And I responded to that question specifically by saying this is probably the first of 12,000 touches that Metro Council individually will have with this. If approved, it essentially establishes a program structure and a funding structure. It doesn't stipulate where stops are. It doesn't stipulate specific alignments. Now, I'm going to be frank, and Jeff can tie into this both because of his role in the legislature and also as an attorney. Wherever you've seen something done for the first time legislatively, legally, financially, this will be litigated. I mean, there's no question in my mind it'll be litigated either within a corridor or plan-wide or what have you, and that's okay. I mean, that happens. It's happened in most of the other cities that's played out. So specifically to how broadly, how big can you change it, you know, once you're proceeding, that will be open to interpretation. But it was absolutely built in with the resilience to know technologies will change, development patterns will change. But, you know, what we don't see really changing and haven't, or otherwise we'd have to probably throw the Improve Act out as a whole because of the TDOT projects that are programmed into it, is those key corridors of travel aren't really going to change all that much. They haven't changed since Indians, Native Americans, traversed, you know, these same paths, and the riverboats made their way up the Cumberland. So fundamentally, to say that, you know, our network's going to change is really hard to fathom. There's absolutely built-in ways to incorporate changes in the technology. Frankly, the fact that the plan relies so heavily on demand-responsive alternatives, Katherine mentioned Access Ride, but mobility on demand, first mile, last mile services that connect to those core arterial corridors, you know, means that it will be a much more resilient and responsive plan as the city changes and the region changes in the future.
Thanks. Well, yeah. Okay. And I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding on this part. The detail that I think is required as part of this is not to handcuff a city. It is to ensure that that an intelligent decision is being made, and we're not saying we're going to have you know, trains from every county border to the center of the city, and it's only going to cost you, you know, a tiny amount of money. The reason that there has to be the detail is that we wanted to ensure that the comptroller looked at the plan, looked at the revenue that was generated, built in reserves, which are part of this plan, and made sure that what the city said you were going to get is roughly what you're going to get. And that you're not sort of saying, I'm going to promise you transit, you know, along these 5 corridors, and then based on political wind shifting, I'm going to switch it to 3 different corridors. It's to ensure that there's sort of some integrity to the project. I would say not only is it not the intent, but like there's certainly, I've had my share of problems with TDOT over the years, but it's not technical-ish readings and that force you into doing impossible things. To the extent that there are engineering challenges, I think that we'll obviously address those, be able to adapt to those. To the extent that new technologies come online that allow us to explore achieving the same plan with fewer dollars or increased savings, I think it would be ludicrous to say that the state's going to stand in the way of that. But I do think that the window in which we have that opportunity to make this decision as a city is a narrow one.
I was sitting here thinking about upstate New York, and I went to college up there. It was very cold. There's no reason for you to do it if you didn't. But I was thinking about the people that must have been standing there going, you know, these boats, this Erie Canal, that's an old technology, boats, things floating on water. Surely we should wait and see what new technology must come. I just can imagine when the railroads were talking about raising the kind of money that had to be raised to bring trains in here, people saying a combination of things. One, you know, the boats are taking care of it. It takes 3 or 4 or 5 days, sometimes weeks to get to Memphis, but it's okay. We can get there from here. It's okay. We're making it okay. We don't need any railroads. You can imagine, on the other hand, people saying, I don't know, maybe something will come after the railroads. There could be some other new technology that will come. Maybe drones. Who knows? I'm telling you right now, these kinds of issues have arisen each time you begin to make investments in things, but the one thing that people in this room know is that these are tried and true things that work, and it's not, as the point's been made earlier, they're being used in, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, San Jose, Berkeley, Oakland, Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, Denver, Salt Lake City, Minneapolis and St. Paul both together. Chicago, long legacy systems continuing to invest. Buffalo, New York more recently. Boston, Massachusetts, New York City, obviously. But you can go on down the seacoast to Baltimore and Philadelphia. Some legacy, some new. Washington, D.C. The metro was never going to succeed in Washington, D.C. because, you know, tunnels, building tunnels under the city, who heard of such a thing? Happens to work very, very well. If we funded it better and kept it up better, it would be even more successful. Keep going down, Jacksonville, Florida, Miami, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte, North Carolina. All of those major cities, we could, if we had more time, go around the world, couldn't we? We could talk about it, and you've been there, Stockholm, Paris, crazy places like that, where they put tunnels under the ground and rail on top of the ground and buses on the roads and have transit and people use them, and no one stands around saying, you know, I don't know, this old technology, we just need to think more about. No, we need to catch up. We don't need to worry about that. And when the government looks up and finds that any piece of this, and the people in the city look up and find any piece of it needs to be adjusted because there have been changes in the world, we know how to do that too.
Yes, somebody should be collecting the questions. Well, I'm going to make an executive decision, and if you'd like to come up to the microphone and ask your question, that would be great. I know, Jeff, you have to leave in a few minutes, and it's not because you're scared of the audience or the questions. I know you have another commitment to make, and so I wanted to just give you a chance to, if you have any final remarks before you leave. I appreciate so much your taking the time to. You okay? Okay.
I just want to say, when I heard transit plan, my first response was, yay, yes, we need this, and I'm very enthusiastic about the idea, but to me the devil is in the details, and I have a couple of questions about what I've seen in the plan. We had a flyer sent home at our house with a map, a little vague, but from what I can tell, the light rail and sort of rapid lines don't go to Antioch or Madison or Bellevue, where the majority of commuters live, and the majority of the people who are moving out of town because they can't afford it. So I'm wondering, you know, why aren't the lines going out that line? Most people are concerned with interstate congestion and reducing that. And so if you don't take the lines out that far, and I'm not talking about switching over to a bus and riding on the bus the rest of the way, because a lot of people won't do that. So I think that, you know, the really key is having the fast light rail and rapid things going out to Antioch, Madison, and Bellevue.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'd point out is, again, Let's Move Nashville, the plan that's on the ballot for May 1st, is a subset of the broader planning effort, be it N-Motion or Nashville Next or what have you. So the long-range vision, the long-range regional vision, is that those lines would extend further out. Look, rail is very expensive. Dedicated right-of-way is very expensive. And again, in a hub-and-spoke system, the need to build out from the center is there. Over the long term, lines ideally would be extended, and I heard Mayor Purcell refer to some of the cities that have done this before. First time's the hardest. Seattle just last year went back a third time and got voter approval to extend funding out and the system out further, adding more miles to it.
And do you remember what the dollars are that they...
There's, I think, was in the $50-some billion range. You know, and again, as your economy grows, that number doesn't become quite as intimidating. So that is absolutely the intent, but I'd come back to something I mentioned earlier, because frankly, feeding those systems, whether it's with bus or cars with park and ride or mobility on demand, is key, because that's essentially right now what our roadway program is kind of moving toward, is expanding capacity to get us to a certain point, kind of within view of the downtown skyline, and then we will come to a dead halt. So building from the center out, really is the intent. The long-term view, including of the regional mayors, pretty quickly we begged forgiveness in Williamson County because of the effort involved here. But within a week or two of the May 1st election, we'll be kicking off the South Corridor study, looking at what high-capacity options for Williamson County and Murray County, feeding into the core here, are viable. So you have to start somewhere. If we built out the entire 100-year plan, those are numbers I can't even get my hands around.
And especially since I'm going to leave, I'll address that too. I mean, the devil is always in the details, and regardless of plan, people are either going to think it does too little, too much. It's hard to get to the Goldilocks for a city of 650,000 people. The long-term vision of this obviously is not just to stop in Antioch, but to go to Murfreesboro, to go to Clarksville, to go a lot farther. But that involves lots of other cities being able to be part of a system. And frankly, one of the challenges that we deal with here is, so you take transit from Murfreesboro or from Clarksville into downtown, but then how do you get to work from there? We have to have a lot more mobility inside the city in order to make regional transit really work. And if you don't see an investment and don't see this city, which is much more willing to take risks than some of our neighbors, show that you can make that mobility within the city work, I don't think that you're going to see Williamson, Rutherford, Clarksville coming in to lead that effort. I think that this is one of those places where Nashville has to be the leader of the region, and it has to be the place that starts it. You can always get down to whether we could do a $15 billion plan, a smaller. It's going to be hard, and there are going to be people who are opposed to it because it's too small or too big, regardless of what you do. The thing to look out for is, what are the real alternatives that are being proposed? Because usually when the alternatives are raised, they are not transit alternatives, they are alternatives to transit. They are double-deckering our highways, they are relying on future technologies that are not legal and do not exist. They are things that, frankly, the opposition here, it should be noted, is funded by the same people that were opposed the Improve Act generally. They were opposed to Nashville having the ability to make this vote in the first place. They were opposed to investing the funds that even to fix 440, much less to do transit. And so it's no surprise that those funds are being used to urge a no vote here. I think there are always ways that we could go longer, ways that it could get closer to my house or to a particular group, but this is a solid plan at a time when we have a narrow window to make a really smart decision for the city, and that's why I'll be voting for transit on May 1 and hope that everyone else does. I've got to leave, but please don't hesitate to email and bring your harder questions then.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate your being here. So I have some questions from the audience and would welcome additional questions if you have them. This one I think I'll address to Steve, and it relates to the question is, will there be more crosstown connections in the plan to complement the light rail? Will there be commuter shuttle buses available? And maybe you could speak specifically to a community like Antioch, which has been the subject of so much conversation in the media lately.
Right. So talking in broad strokes, if you think about light rail, rapid bus as sort of the core arteries in the system, The other key piece of that network is a network of 19 neighborhood and regional transit centers, or mobility hubs, located throughout the county, including a couple in Antioch, Bellevue, Madison, a lot of the places that have been mentioned. Those mobility hubs, some in the further outlying areas would encompass park and ride capacity. They would generally occur where there's an intersection of a key trunk or a high capacity line, as well as other connecting services on transit. But they would also be kind of locuses for other mobility options, or transportation networking companies, rideshare operators, car share operators, taxi systems, bike share, and built into the plan is expanding the pedestrian network around those centers, ideally connected to other activity hubs in our region. In fact, at the MTA, we're currently working with Metro Nashville Public Schools to design a hub like this around the renovated Hillsborough High School in the Green Hills area, with Tennessee State University to do one up in North Nashville with a particular developer up in the Bordeaux area who's working on mixed use. So trying to tie them into bigger projects. Connecting to that, more crosstown connections. Some of the four specific crosstowns are highlighted in the plan. I won't remember them offhand. I know Trinity is one of them, but several that sort of make that system connection. And we timed out the modeling for folks who have to make those types of trips. Trip time would be reduced when you combine with greater frequency by up to 80%, by not having to go all the way into the downtown core and then all the way back out. So that's how some of that mobility is addressed. And the other thing I'd add, it also ties into the equity question and the fare question. Several years ago, when Metro Transit and the Mayor's office and Metro Nashville Public Schools entered into the STRIDE program, we now have 5,000 Metro Nashville Public School students a day, particularly at the high school level, using the MTA system. Many of them are using it to access charter schools, magnet schools that aren't in their neighborhoods. Some of those kids have 2-hour trips one way, because the frequency of service and the connections they have to make, in some cases 2 connections, make it very difficult for them to do so. So absolutely the crosstown connections, but also the mobility on demand connections are critically important. There's also funding baked in when you talk about the devil being in the details, and the fact that you can't put everything in concrete on day one, to work with communities like Bellevue or Madison on neighborhood circulator types of services that both feed that network and also make local connections possible, even if you just need to get from your apartment complex to the supermarket that's 3/4 of a mile down the street.
This is a question specifically for Katherine, but some of our other panelists that have experience with other communities with robust transit may want to answer as well, and that is, what did you find to be most attractive about the transit services that you were able to avail yourself of in Chicago and Boston?
Sure, so I think it was that it was easy. I didn't go there planning on taking the train everywhere. I didn't go there planning on riding the bus. It was just there. It was to the point that I didn't need a car. So it was easy, it was accessible, it was fast. It was just the best way to get everywhere. And so if you make it something that people actually want to do, then people will ride it. I think the benefits are myriad. It's fast, it's outside your door, you can walk there, you can back there, you can get exercise. It takes you where you need to go. You don't have to park when you get there. And you feel like you're kind of part of the community a lot more than when you're sitting in your car on the interstate. So it was just a very natural thing. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was just part of the city. It was part of life. And I think that's the way that really needs to be.
Other comments from anyone?
Well, Hello? Oh, here we are. I wanted to tie into something I heard Katherine say earlier, which was my experience, particularly living in Pittsburgh. The whole sense of community, and a lot of my favorite routes in our system in Pittsburgh were the ones where you would see the $200,000 a year lawyer on the bus with a person maybe just getting off a housekeeping shift at a hotel, and there was just no distinction. You could assume, I suppose, that the fancy suit meant one thing, and work clothes meant another. That wasn't always the case. So that real sense of community, which we're kind of having a hard time finding anymore, you know, really to me, in what I'll call a robust transit city like a Chicago, a Boston, or a Pittsburgh, you know, is something that is really unique, and if you haven't experienced it, you are in for a treat.
And I would say this plan is very aspirational as it relates to community, to make certain that we build that community. And I think during a lot of our public meetings and comments, we heard the conversations about making it easier. Also, how we interface more with technologies that are available now, so people know when they can get to the bus, when it's going to come, not waiting necessarily. So while maybe we're not as easy as Chicago or other places, I think that MTA has done an incredible job of trying to make it easier, and I think with some of the immediate changes you see with this plan, you'll find easy comes quicker. So I do think that we are working extremely hard to make it easier. Hopefully that will make more people ride, right?
So next question from the audience, and if there are others, you can find someone to give them to, or I'd invite you to come to the microphone. Where exactly is the funding for the transit plan coming from? I guess I'll probably direct that to Steve and to Gail.
So there are a combination of sources, and for people who are really into the details, if there's anybody out of the accounting program here, I would commend you to the very back of the 56-page document where there are detailed cash flows of both income, project expenses, and operations. But largely the referendum is built around the sales and use tax, which, as Jeff mentioned, was authorized by the General Assembly. That will generate about 93–94% of the local dollars. 0.5% would go into effect this year, an additional 0.5% for a full percent in 2023. The others are 1/4% on the hotel tax, going up to 0.3% in 2023, and then 20% surcharges, not 20% taxes, but a 20% surcharge on the existing business tax and the existing car rental tax. Those would all leverage federal funding. And one of the questions I got up until 2–3 weeks ago is, oh my God, they're talking about completely emasculating the federal transit program. It's not going to exist. The money you're counting on is going away. That had been talked about in Congress and by the White House. And lo and behold, when they passed the omnibus appropriations bill a few weeks ago and it was signed into law by President Trump, the very program that they said was going to go away was increased by $300 million this year. So I am either fortunate enough or old enough to have lived through about 3 or 4 iterations of the federal transit program disappearing. It is a program that is very popular, particularly in the congressional delegations. So federal funding does make up a significant, but not the majority, piece of the program.
Anything else? There's been a lot of conversation about issues related to the disruption that will be created when we implement these investments. And specifically, the questioner asks, how will construction likely impact future transportation in and around the downtown and surrounding areas?
So I'll speak from some experience with prior projects, because the direct answer is until we really get into a design and a construction mitigation, full construction mitigation program, would be hard to know specifically. But I'll use the example of a project I was involved in with Pittsburgh, where we actually did tunneling under the Allegheny River to extend our subway system. And it really involved, and the intent in this program is certainly to have a neighborhood and business outreach program to the extreme that extends to everything from detailed minute-to-minute communications with affected businesses and neighbors about what detours might be in place, what business access points might be impacted, frankly taking into account up front, well, what are the busiest seasons? So you'll notice that TDOT, when they're doing major construction, tends to suspend the activities on those days that, say, the Titans are playing at home or CMA Fest. So some of it may very well be, look, our business is really hot during this time of year and it kind of tails off. Okay, so you cater schedules to that point. Having business ombudsman activities. It's like any other construction activity. There will be spot disruptions. There will be spot road closures. If you've driven through downtown Nashville lately, that is not a foreign item for you. We have a lady in our office, Katie Hildreth, who issues our day-to-day route detours through the downtown core by email. And I say, Katie, it would be really faster for me to read which routes are not on detour today. Down to, mitigation strategies if there are claims against business losses. What we did in Pittsburgh, and I know it's the intent of Mayor Briley with this program, to be able to say to a business, no business that was viable without this project will become unviable with this project. So it's working hand in hand with local businesses, neighbors, to make sure that the impacts of construction, are mitigated to the maximum extent feasible. And there are literally dozens of ways to approach that. But I would also hasten to add, with the project list that I ran off earlier, with the TDOT roadway widenings, construction impact is not an avoidable, as I tell people with the Improve Act now that Jeff's gone, the good news is they're going to completely redo I-440. The bad news is they're going to completely redo I-440.
I have a question from the audience, and I think we're going to have time for about one more question, and then I'm going to invite our panel members to make 1 or 2 minutes of concluding comments, and we'll let you all go. So please.
Hi, thank you for your time. I think this is possibly an unusual question, but I've noticed that Nashville drivers tend to be really, really bad, and a lot of traffic is caused by people not understanding the laws of the road, not being able to zipper merge, not being kind to one another, which is unfortunately just not valued very highly. So I am concerned with the new transit plan, whether Nashville drivers are going to know how to interact with the new systems, how to yield, how to interact with bicycles, these issues. So is there money allotted for public education?
Well, and this actually ties to several other things. People have asked, well, where in the plan can I find technology, or even the issues of sidewalk and pedestrian access. There are some specific lines you'll see, and then there's a lot baked into individual projects. Look, when you're changing travel patterns, whether that's integrating light rail into an arterial, or adding another lane to I-440, there is an adjustment period for people who use those facilities. And sometimes that adjustment period is difficult. When Houston implemented their light rail downtown, the paper down there had a day-to-day watch of collisions of vehicles and light rail trains because people just weren't used to that thing being there. One of the things that's being incorporated into the corridor projects is state-of-the-art traffic signalization programs, so that to the extent, because I agree with you, although I will say one thing, I grew up in New Jersey, so Nashville drivers have nothing on my home state. And I also lived in Pittsburgh, home of the Pittsburgh left. If you're in a 2-lane situation and somebody who's in the straight lane cuts to the left in front of you, you can refer that. It is trademarked as a Pittsburgh left. That's exactly what's done there. So it is a matter of adjustment. There are typically education and orientation programs similar to what you see. Mayor Purcell mentioned a bunch of us live in East Nashville. When they installed the new traffic light on Main Street, for a period of time you saw flashing yellow. Now this will become a traffic light. So it really is that period of indoctrination. But people get used to it a lot more quickly, than you think they would. And the other thing I would highlight about the impacts, particularly of light rail, to an extent it's true also of rapid bus, is it will make those corridors safer generally for several reasons. First of all, with median running, it is true you will not be able to make a left turn just anywhere you want to. A good thing coming out of that is that means there won't be as many collisions of people making left turns into oncoming traffic. And where you can make a left turn will be a safer intersection. There will be areas of refuge, that track running down the middle of the street at intersections where pedestrians cross, coming back to seniors and what happens as we age. You are not going to have to race across 6 lanes of speeding traffic. You'll have to race across 2 lanes of speeding traffic to get to the area of refuge, rest up a bit, you know, for the rest of the trip. It's a period of adjustment. There will be education, but people are pretty resilient, you know, when it comes to those types of things.
Just real quick, I got to Boston, and you may remember you sent me off there after I left office, and I asked why does no one here use their turn signals? And the first response I got was that would be giving aid and comfort to the enemy. On the issue of adaptability here in Nashville, here's some good news. Factual, if anecdotal, when we put the first roundabouts in, the first one was up here at the top of Music Row, the Public Works Department in Nashville, which was concerned as you are that Nashvillians would not know what to do in a roundabout, came and said, we can't do it. And I said, why? And they said, well, people won't know, they won't know how to get in, and if they get in, they'll never be able to get out. They'll just drive around and around and around for weeks, and we'll have to go out there and move them out of the roundabout. And it turns out, actually, it's not perfect yet, but they have over time actually figured it out. So there's reason for some encouragement.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's see, one final question, and then we're going to need to wrap it up.
Thank you. A couple of points. You're right about New Jersey drivers. I'm from New York, and they are the worst. And I am from New York, born and raised in Brooklyn, so I know about transit. And I just have a couple of points to make. The start of the New York City subway was not done by the city. It was independent companies, as were the railroads in this country. They were independent companies. Private industry built the railroads and the subways in New York. And then in about 1950, the city took it over in New York, the subway system, and it's been downhill from there on. As a lifelong transit rider, I didn't even have a driver's license until I was 27 years old. So I didn't need a car. But I think this is a bad plan. It's an expensive plan, and it doesn't really serve the people who really need it. And I don't know that you're really going to help the gentrification, but the worst part about it is I don't know who's going to be in charge of this plan. And based on the things I've been seeing, and I've been here since 2015, so I only came a year after all of you, based on the things I've been seeing about the local government in Nashville, I'm concerned about what you guys are going to do with $9 billion, because the superintendent of schools can't manage on his budget, the hospital can't manage on the budget they've been getting, and I don't blame the hospital. I think they've been underfunded all these years. I just think there's an awful lot of faith that you people want, because I don't see who's going to be in charge of $9 billion with a B dollars. And I am a senior citizen, and I moved to this particular area purposely because I can walk to anything I need. I don't need a bus, I don't need a car. And eventually I am prepared to give my children the keys to my car. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll let each of you respond to that in just a minute. I'm going to make a couple of concluding remarks, and I appreciate the perspective, especially about public-private and how do we get things done in this country, and it kind of tees up what I wanted to begin with. So I'm a lifetime person in the transportation space, mostly as a manager in the private sector. But I've been involved in advocating and lobbying for prudent and sound public investments that are really essential. And I'm convinced from that experience that one thing, if we're going to move the needle on mobility, it requires really large investments, and we are speaking about those here, to be sure, as the last speaker noted. Those investments to be accomplished take decades, not years. And they require a long-term, stable, predictable source of funding. And we have a great example of a publicly funded infrastructure project, the biggest in our country's history. You go back a little further than 1999, as Bill did. And that was the Interstate Highway Program that was launched post-World War II by President Eisenhower. And what were the essential ingredients of making that work? Well, the first thing that was needed was a dedicated, permanent gas and diesel tax, which at the time was an absolutely ginormous tax relative to the cost of anything else, included the gasoline. And it was totally disruptive. And it was opposed by many as they were seeking implementation of that system in local areas, Nashville included. And it had many negatives, and some of those are prominently noted here in our city, like the routing that happened through the historically black neighborhoods in west and north of Nashville. There was a positive to that routing, and that was that they didn't route that interstate highway along the river, which if you look at many other cities today that are along our rivers are struggling with the calamity that now exists with that interstate highway system blocking the river. And we live to this day with some of the negative implications of that broader program, the urban sprawl, the homogenization, and so forth. But that was started nearly 70 years ago, and what we're facing today is that it's done. We are going to expand 840, but there are no plans that I'm aware of to expand any of the other interstate highway systems that we all depend upon. So we've all become the victims of our own success and shortcomings. Now, can we use that asset, the highway system, interstate highway system, better than we do today? You bet. And my colleague Malcolm Getz, who is sitting here, has been a forceful advocate for the fact that we need to tax the tar out of people who use those interstate highway systems, and we need to convert some of those lanes to dedicated lanes for public transit and for carpooling, and other cities have done that. And it's certainly not, and I would advocate and strongly advocate that we do that here in this state. It's not clear to me that Jeff will have any success in moving that forward in our state of Tennessee today. But to me, it's not either or. It's not that we do that or we do transit. It's both and. We need to make better use of that highway system, and hopefully the pain will become so acute that we will start to move the needle in that regard. You know, I was thinking back, Mayor Purcell, you and I first became engaged together, I think, in stopping a link in the highway system that was proposed that was going to connect the two sides of the loop, and you might want to comment about that. But you had the vision to make sure we didn't make that happen, and if we had done that, we would not have the success of South of Broad or the Gulch neighborhoods today that we have. So I think that this plan for us represents the same transformative opportunity that the interstates represented 70 years ago. And I think we're up to the task, despite the fact that it is the public sector that's going to do it. So quickly, my top reasons for going to the polls tomorrow and voting yes on this. The dedicated funding for transit, to me, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this city, and we should not forsake it. I know many are opposed to this plan because it doesn't dedicate enough money to stuff other than transit. But as Jeff noted, if you think the opposition to funding this plan from those that are just opposed to taxes, forget about whatever goes after the no tax phraseology, and we try to move forward with some dedicated funding for things like affordable housing, I think you're living in some other state. From my perspective as a systems person, the tunnel is the genius part of this plan. We're blessed and cursed by the fact that we got these interstate highways and these corridors that preceded the interstate highways that come together in our city, and they don't connect very well downtown. So the services that we do have are not nearly what they need to be. And that tunnel is going to be designed so it can handle bus or BRT or light rail, as they do today in cities like Seattle. And I think that's the opportunity to really create a truly seamless system that will provide a high level of service. And finally, the part that I haven't heard very much talked about is we have this historic pikes that I think Mayor Purcell talked about a little bit that we have just abused and abandoned in our city. And by putting investment into those pikes, we can reclaim those, whether it's Nolensville or Gallatin or Charlotte, close to where I live, and make them magnets for the development that we want in this city. So I am voting yes. I thank Gail for organizing these forums, and I've been quietly keeping my mouth shut until this very minute. So I want to turn it over to the other panelists in the last few minutes that we have remaining.
The only thing I'd quickly say, and I'm prohibited by law from advocating one way or the other, but I would say if you look at the cities that we are competing with and the cities that are successful, or for that matter, if you look at your retirement investments. It's about diversifying your portfolio. We have been super heavily invested in single occupant auto use, and this is a matter of diversifying that portfolio. And I think the cities that will be successful and the regions that will be successful in the future aren't the ones who bet and win on, well, what technology is going to win? Is it going to be canal boats with the Erie Canal? Is it going to be, you know, autos in the interstates? Is it going to be autonomous vehicles? The answer is all of the above, and the cities that win are the ones that figure out the right balance and the way to seamlessly tie them together with an overall goal of improving the quality of life for the people who live, work, play, and visit there. And that's the opportunity that Nashville has with this. I was on a panel 3-4 days ago with the regional manager for Lyft. Lyft is on board supporting this plan. He said, here's my dirty little secret. I live in Washington, D.C. I can ride Lyft for free, and I ride the Metro to work. So it's not about picking one or the other. It's about balance, and right now our portfolio is a little bit unbalanced.
Yeah, I think the key thing about this plan is to give people options. I think that's really the main thing that we need to think about this going forward. $9 million is a lot of money. If you look, billion, if you look at other, sorry, I said billion. If you look at other similar plans in other cities, it's still a drop in the bucket. We referred to the recent plan that passed in Seattle. It was $56 billion. So it sounds like a lot, but it's been a very, very thoughtful process in putting this plan together, and we have to, I think, respect that. Respect the work that has gone into this. No one just came up with this plan yesterday. It's been many years of a lot of community input and a lot of work that's come up with this. This is the plan. There's not a better secret plan hiding out there somewhere. This is our one chance to make a difference. If we don't pass this plan, then the other option is driving everywhere and keeping things the same. We're not suddenly going to come up with a better plan tomorrow that we didn't have today. So this is really the shot that we have. I can criticize the plan as well. I can find things that I would like to be more specific in the plan. And those are all things that we can work on after the fact. We have to get the funding first, and then we can work on all the details and all the things that we would like to see this play out. So I think this is part of the process. This is a really critical part of the process. And it's really critical for all of us to move forward on this.
I think you should just do what your doctor says. Very frankly. I've grew up in Philadelphia, lived in New York, had to drive through New Jersey on the way. I've paid attention to the governments in lots of other places. This is the lowest tax big city and the lowest tax state, or next to the lowest tax state in America. The reason we are that is because we have done more with less for a long time. I trust the government in this case to oversee it because I trust you, because you'll oversee the government. It works that way here. It always has. We see the things that trouble you, and we act upon them. We speak out about them. It's not like that in every other place. It's like that here. So over time, I do believe that we will implement, as we have in the past, the project that the people of this city want, and I believe that the people of this city will want this project, and I hope that you'll vote to do so.
And I trust MTA. And part of this plan provides that the implementation goes to MTA. Our MTA has some of the most trusted professionals in the country, I think, led by our CEO, Steve Bland, and also our trusted and great drivers. And we can never go without thanking our drivers that get our Nashvillians to and from safely and as much on time as they can when they have to avoid some construction on occasions. But I think that goes unspoken. And I think also the other professionals at MTA who have been responsible for this planning, who have been responsive to the community and hearing the things that the community needs and wants to be able to be a part of executing this plan. So I trust MTA. I'm grateful and honored to serve on their board and to serve the city in this way. So I do trust them. And I recognize change and progress is sometimes disruptive, but that's okay because when you get to the other side of it, it's a whole lot better. And I think once we get to the other side of this, things will be a lot better for a lot of people that it's not as good for today. Those who always don't have choice of whether or not to drive, or whether or not to walk, or whether or not to be able to do it on their own or not on their own. This gives our citizens choice, and it also is the impetus for for other surrounding counties to make change as well, to sort of support this plan and to support the residents and the citizens of those counties that surround us. So I think it's a good time for us, and I do think that if not now, then when? And on behalf of this panel, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everyone.